All right, it's 8:30, so we're going to start the merchant panel. Thank you very much, everybody. Good morning. I'd like to thank, first off, today's refreshment sponsors, Mass Labor and Yakima Chief Hops. So today on the panel, it'll be Alex Barth, Chief Executive Officer of Johnny Haas, Inc., and partner of Barth Haas, Missy Raper, Vice President of Quality and Planning, Louis Gimmel IV, President and COO of SS Steiner, J.D. Dempsey, President of Brewer Supply Group, and Chris Holden, owner and partner, New York Hop Guild and Crooked Creek Hops. And we will start off with Alex Barth.
Thank you very much. Oh. Can you please stand up as well? Okay, I'm asking too much here. So let's get right to it. As was said, I'll start the presentation, followed by Louis, and then Missy will pick up the end of the presentation and have the uplifting moment, because here I'm often called the doom and gloom guy. But before we start, I want to have a tribute to industry figures that we've lost over the last year. Former industry leaders like Johannes Reiser, Werner Selmer, and Albert Jennecke, influencers like Elaine Smith, and longtime dedicated figures to the hop industry like Randy Duvall. There are many more, and you know who they are, so I'm going to ask you to have a brief moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. So now let's go on to the global and U.S. beer industry trends. That will be my section, and then Louis will come and talk about the hop industry itself. For most of you, you've probably seen this chart before, except now it's updated to include 2021. It basically covers 30 years of changes in the brewing industry, brewing volume, and as you look at 2020, you see a pretty steep drop-off. That drop-off is just about 5%. That's the impact of the pandemic. But I gotta say, last year when I stood up here and said we're expecting 2020 to drop 8 to 10%, in hindsight, we were overly pessimistic, and so only 5% drop is pretty good. However, as we look into 2021, we're not seeing the great pickup that we've hoped. First, there was Delta in the summer, which basically ruined the summer months, and then Omicron did a number on the winter months. So for 2021 at this point, we're expecting beer volume in the world to be only flat to maybe marginally increasing. I'm hoping we'll have a positive surprise. Just a quick review of who are the 10 most important brewing nations in the world. The shading intensity indicates size. And if you look at the total production of those 10 countries, it represents 2/3 of the world's beer production. So what happens in those 10 countries impacts us all. Look at China. China came out quickly after squelching the coronavirus in the early part of 2020, but has maintained its COVID-0 policy and thereby has entered into multiple lockdowns over the course of the years. And I gotta say, when they talk about lockdowns, you cannot be on the street, you cannot leave your apartment, and therefore lockdowns are not conducive to beer drinking. The US remained actually flat to the previous year. Most of the growth forward has been through seltzers. Brazil and Mexico, the two bright spots, I would say, they grew in 2020, and we believe they grew again in 2021. I'm not going to continue the list because Germany would be next, and I could only say about Germany, they know how to bureaucratically administer various lockdowns which are not conducive to beer drinking. Don't get me started on the Germans. Okay, so I want to focus now on the on versus off-premise. This chart basically looks at the distribution of on-premise versus off-premise, and basically the world until 2020, so the pandemic year, was about 2/3 1/3 off-premise to on-premise. The closing restrictions basically dropped that share to 29%. And as we look forward, we don't see much of a recovery in the on-premise in 21 and a slow and gradual recovery of the share over the next several years out. I want to remind you that some regions in Europe have about as much as 50% on-premise. So the continuation of restrictions and hesitations or unavailability of labor certainly has impact on that beer consumption there. But as you take those numbers and look into the consumer spend, it's a bit of a different picture. While there was 1/3, 2/3 volume of on-premise versus off-premise, it is about 50-50 in value share. So consumers spend about as much money or half equal amounts on the on-premise, even though they're only consuming 1/3 volume. Looking at 2020, the estimate here of Statista is that $100 billion of beer spend was less spent in 2020, which is huge, about $10 billion less on the off-premise. And it's going to take a couple of years for that on-premise to recover, about for the next 3-4 years, and then it's going to continue growing nicely, both the on and off-premise. This is not a volume drive, this is a value drive. And the reason for that is, as the brewing industry changed into more premium products, higher value products, and inflation, you're going to see the total spend increase as well. So why am I spending some good amount of time on the on-premise? For the hop industry, the on-premise is one of the most important channels that we have. I look at the on-premise as the test kitchen in the US and the world. It's the one area where you can brew, take, serve, and get an immediate feedback. If you have to do this on the off-premise, you got to brew, package, channel into the distribution, marketing, and back. You don't get the immediate feedback, and it's a much more costly way. So for the hop industry, having a lively tap room scene is extremely important. I don't want to see these empty tap rooms. This picture I got there, beautiful tap room, but it's empty. We need to get back to these tap rooms, experiment with beers, because that's where we get the feedback on the next best variety. So as we look at the U.S. beer industry's volume through October 21 and compare it to the volume in 2019, you can clearly see that the on-premise has declined. If you look at the very left side, it says beer F&B category. You see the orange bars are the on-premise, the blue bars are the off-premise, and the gray bars are the total beer. There's hardly any bar on the total beer because it's pretty flat. Clearly, craft took in the shorts on the on-premise. It's still lagging quite behind 2019, where most of the growth was on the F&B side, hard seltzer. And so that gets me to my favorite topic. Ladies and gentlemen, this is beer. This is nice premium beer, good value, got lots of hops. This is not beer, but in the US, it's considered as beer. And oh, by the way, there's the RTDs. We heard about them yesterday. They're trying to encroach as well. So the brewing industry has made it sort of blur the lines across all these categories, and I know there's some brewers in here that actually are into seltzers and are into these other products, but my point is, this is the American Hop Convention. No hops, it's not beer. Yeah. So, what the hell does everybody else think what I say? The lines are blurring. The lines are blurring not just across individual categories like beer, seltzers, RTDs, they're also blurring across companies that make them. So recently, we've seen beer makers going to non-alcoholics or non-alcoholics go into beer like Monsters did. So the lines are blurred from the product, and the lines are blurred from the makers of those products. So let me take a step back and talk about real beer. You've seen this chart before. It's a continuation of past years. And we try to look at how does the industry find its balance. We've had in the past many times alpha balance and this and that, so there's lots of calculations going in. This is actually quite a simple approach. It basically says how much beer was produced in every given year and how much hops was produced in the preceding year. And so over time, it does match up. The solid line is the actual data, the smooth line is the trend line, which is probably a pretty good approximation of what the actual hopping rate is. And if you take a look at some of the years and look at the red arrow right there in 2010, which basically is brew year 2010, crop year 2009, there was a calculated oversupply of 43 million pounds. That's quite a lot. You go to 2016, 40 million deficit. And in 2020, which is crop 2019, was basically 30 million surplus. As a matter of fact, we have been, in the last several years, in a slight oversupply or accumulating oversupply. Just so as a note, the data on the very end is a little bit skewed because this kind of methodology is better looking back several years where there's more data to be had. But what is 30 million plus, 40 million minus in comparison to annual crop fluctuations? And you look at the total U.S. crop, and this is again going back 20 years, where you start on the left-hand side with crop 2002, nearly at zero. And you have some adds, some declines. As a matter of fact, in 2003, you had a 30 million pound change from one year to the next. Moving close to 2020, it was 16 million pounds minus from the previous year. So when you look at how much are we oversupplied? Well, we are oversupplied, but we're just one short crop away from being in balance. So that's about the impact here. Now, I'm not saying let's hope for the best and get a short crop, but I want to put in perspective that we are in an oversupply, but the oversupply is within the variations from year to year. But what does that leave our brewing customers to do? There's a great hesitation. We all heard about the Great Resignation and other things. Well, the hop industry right now is experiencing the Great Hesitation. Indecision 2022 sounds like election. So we are at the point where we say there's a fear of overcontracting. There's the fear of contracting the wrong varieties. And of course, there's also this idea that maybe if I wait, would it be cheaper? My point only is Omicron will go. There will be life after Omicron. The industry has been proven to be much more resilient than we expected. And I want to make sure that we keep the conversation going because for the brewer industry, you do not want the hop industry to assume. And everybody knows what the word assume means, right? Make an ass out of you and me, right? Okay, got it? So keep the conversation going because it's extremely important for us to make the right decisions as we go forward. And now, I would like to hand off to Louis. Thank you very much.
So now that we heard the conclusion, let's go back and look at some detail on the hop production side. Steady climb of acreage the last 10 years, and what we've really seen is that increase driven by two countries, first the United States and then Germany. We see in the United States a steady climb up. We all know thanks to the customers, craft customers doing so well and using so many hops, and that's been, as Alex said, unfortunately offset a little bit by both the pandemic and by seltzer and FMBs. The acreage has stabilized in the last 2 years. Obviously, what's happened health-wise is a huge concern for all of us. The rest of the world, outside of the EU, outside of Germany, and other countries have become much less important in hops. And that trend started many years earlier, largely because of the really important factor of yield when the hop market was purely commodity and focused on alpha production. Looking at the individual countries, seeing the acreage trend, just in the last 3 years, about 10,000 acres added worldwide. The increase percentage-wise sort of mirrors what beer has been doing globally. It's not out of line. Then you throw in the pandemic and you say, well, maybe we need to have a bit of a reset, a bit of a pause. Even more important than the acreage is the yields. So if the acreage in the United States has gone up tremendously in the last 20 or so years, what we have seen is a leveling off of the yield as we have shifted largely from an export-oriented bitter market to a majority domestic aroma mixed-use variety profile. You can see here the yield in the United States flattening out and actually somewhat behind the yield in Germany, where the market flipped from more aroma to more bitter production. Some of the other countries that are important to look at here, Czech Republic, an aroma specialty producer, acreage has been flat, but look at that yield change. Year over year, there's wild fluctuations there, and that's sort of what Alex was talking about, that one year you think you have a surplus, the next year suddenly it's gone, and that's happened a lot in Germany. I would say in the United States we've been very fortunate with the resilience of our varieties, resilience of our growing conditions, even a year like we had this year. Missy will talk about it later, just making it through that extreme heat wave. This is what I was mentioning before, the growth of the aroma, the mixed-use variety in the share of the hops. And it's really remarkable to go from a purely commodity market where at this convention all we used to talk about was what's the exchange rate, what's the mark or the euro versus the dollar. That would determine what is the market that we're all up against. And U.S. growers really aren't looking at that anymore. It's become a specialty market, it's become a craft market, and that's a tribute to our customers, it's a tribute to the consumer who voted with his taste buds. And here is where the growers come in. Look at the huge range of varieties that we're growing in the United States. This pie shows the kind of creativity that's out there. If I was better at PowerPoint and I could put up the slide from 10 years ago, that pie would be so much smaller in terms of the choice that brewers have. And looking ahead, some of us obviously hope for more and more choice. I think that breeding never stops, and it's going to be even more, many more unique flavors and aromas are going to come out of the U.S. hop industry and make this even better for brewers to have choice, for creativity, for the consumer. So after the last 2 years of the pandemic, I think we can all understand even better how we're all in this together and understand in the last year the mess of supply chain out there. It's a big cliche, but what supply chain really means is in the hop industry all the way from the snowfall we're getting right now in the mountains to the actual tin of extract or pouch of pellets in the brewery. And all of us are doing everything we can to make sure that hops get to you on a timely basis. As Alex said, the great indecision, well, one indecision we can't have is, delaying decisions on shipping, delaying decisions on inventory, because we've learned how sometimes we have disruptions and we need to get our product to market. Another issue where the two red arrows are is labor. We've had tremendous challenges, making sure we can fill all the positions, whether it's because of COVID or whether it's because of wages, because of immigration. You can see there, people are being paid to actually come to an interview, and that is not a photoshopped picture. On the left side, I mean, just costs in general, labor being the biggest for growers, but costs of energy, costs of all kinds of supplies being a challenge, and Missy will be talking about that. We thought we'd put up a slide to show the role of inflation. We aren't putting a beer can up there, we're putting up the turkey dinner, which we all had a couple months ago. We all heard about the rising cost of the turkey dinner, and that's something that is frustrating. And you heard yesterday from Bart how brewers are recognizing that their costs are going up, but they haven't quite yet passed those costs on to consumers. And that's going to be a challenge when everything is in an inflationary mode. It's very difficult to pass costs along, so we have to be very, very focused on those costs. The thing that Bart was mentioning also goes to what Alex was saying about that shift from on-premise to off-premise, because if you're trying to sell more beer through the supermarket channel, it's way more competitive. There's a lot more pressure selling into the Walmarts and the Costcos, Safeways of the world, and that inevitably will trickle back to supply chain of hops and other raw materials. So we have to be on our toes. I think we're going to go on to people and environment. Missy, thank you. Yep.
Good morning, everyone. It's so great to see everybody this morning. I'm honored to be on the panel this morning with Alex, Louis, JD, and Chris. Ryan was really sorry he couldn't make it this trip. When he asked me to step in for him, I was only slightly terrified, but mostly proud to represent Yakima Chief, and really truly blessed to be part of this wonderful industry and all the wonderful growers and brewers. Oops, let me make this work. Okay. So a little bit on labor cost. We all know that labor costs have increased quite a bit over the last year, and this is going to hit the growers hard this year in Washington with the removal of overtime exemption. Agriculture workers have always been exempt from overtime because of the seasonal nature of the job. Their jobs are very much summer and fall, and then they have the winter off. So this is going to cause a large increase in cost in growers, and they're going to end up having to cut some of those hours and replace with other workers. And most of them will try to do that with the H-2A workers. So in the U.S., the H-2A program is a government program where you can bring in foreign workers for temporary agricultural jobs. This has grown quite a bit. You can see this last year, there was just over 300,000 in the U.S. Washington State had over 28,000 the H-2A workers, in Idaho 6,000. These positions are valuable to the hop industry. They're also very costly to the hop industry. The H-2A employees have to be paid the adverse effect wage rate, which in 2022 will be $17.41 an hour in Washington and Oregon, and $14.68 an hour in Idaho. Along with that, the growers have to provide housing, and all the housing has to be certified by the Department of Health. This housing can be a substantial cost, and then the transportation, both to the farm, the initial transportation back home, and then all the transportation around the valleys to do the labor. So labor needs in hops are unique. I don't need to tell the growers this. I just love this slide. This was provided by Jeff Peralt. All the different colors are the different jobs required on the farm. And this is just the growing season, January to September. And the scale is how many employees. It requires a lot of skilled labor. You need people that can do all these different jobs, and you have to do them at the right time. You can't twine in June. You got to get it done early, right? And the training season, you have to train the hops at the right time or the yields are gonna go down. So having the right people at the right time is very important. A little bit on environmental here. So water management, the growers know this is extremely important. Having a good snowpack, having it melt at the right time so the reservoirs get filled. If we get 90-degree days in April and all the snowpack goes down the river, it's not too helpful for the hop growers. We need water all season. There's a lot of work. Growers are doing great things, innovative things on the irrigation side. A lot of research is being done, trying to find the most efficient way to use that water. We want to be good stewards of the environment and preserve the water and make sure the rivers stay full. On the climate change side, we all know it's getting hotter. So this graph shows the last 120 years, the temperature, how it was cooler, and now since 1980 it's been on a warming spree. We saw this last year with the record-shattering heat in the valley. It was hot. It was really hot. This was really hard for the growers. It was hard for the employees out in the fields. Working, starting at 4 a.m. to noon was about the most they could do, I think, on most farms. It was a challenge, and I think it was somewhat lucky it hit in June and not when the cones were trying to set, because that would have been more impactful on the yields. And this kind of weather events, this one, and then the wind event we had a couple years ago, these are probably will continue as climate change continues. All right, a little bit about our favorite topic in the growing community, the MRLs. If you were brave enough and got up at 8 a.m., you heard Bryant Christie talk about the EU challenges that we're facing. They do have their new European Green Deal. This was passed in 2019, and the goal is the sustainable EU economy, which sounds fabulous, right? We all want a sustainable economy. In 2020, they did the Farm to Fork rollout, and this is really aimed at reducing dependency on pesticides. So the EU growers have been hit really hard with this. The amount of pesticides they can use have been reduced. So far, the U.S. growers have still kept some of their import MRLs. At first, they were just remove the ones that they considered a health hazard, but now they're looking at removing the ones that are environmental hazards. So now they're exporting their environmental policies out across the world. And these policies are not likely to change. They're unlikely to change. We're going to be faced with this for a long time. So I think continuing to shift U.S. hops will require innovative solutions. The growers in this room, I have never met a more innovative bunch, and a stubborn bunch, right? They're going to grow the hops, and they're going to get it done, no matter what. I think our long-term goal is more pest-resistant varieties. We won't be able to send powdery mildew susceptible varieties to the EU pretty soon because the residues will be too much. Good integrated pest management plans, growers already embrace this. Using organic growing strategies, I've talked to a lot of organic growers that are moving that out to their conventional yards and saving on those pesticide inputs by doing that. If you've ever seen the video of the drone flying over the hop yard and the little ladybugs parachuting out, it's just fabulous. And we see more and more of that going on. And we'll have to support continued research on spray timingness, effectiveness, and residues, because we want to have that balance of a very effective spray with the least amount of residues. That'll be really important. In other countries, China's new MRL requirements are coming up. They have limited hop MRLs, and they really have no way to apply for new MRLs. Taiwan has limited MRLs and also not a good way to apply for new ones. Korea has made a lot of progress. They did their temporary MRL list, put in a lot of permanent MRLs, and we're making progress at getting more. So Korea is looking good. And the bottom line, merchants are really gonna have to work with growers and customers to find common solutions so we can get the customers the hops they need. We have to support the research around good sprays and good agronomics, increase education for customers. Customers need to understand where these costs are coming from, that growing hops is not easy. It requires a lot of innovation and stubbornness. And working with the growers to find that balance of quality and compliance. You know, you guys need to you grow fabulous quality hops, and we can do that and also meet these regulations. So hops are here for beer. That's why we're here. We love beer. And not seltzers, we love beer. We see a lot of stable quality across all the varieties now. Substantial investment in picking and kilning facilities. The growers have put in such good facilities these last few years and continue to do so. And the amount of increased quality out of that has been substantial. On the merchant side, also a lot of investment in improved technologies and customer service, e-commerce platforms. Innovation not only meets but spurs demand. The more innovation we have, growers getting back on premise to do those test kitchens that Alex was talking about. And the industry can really move forward in a sustainable way to meet the goals of our brewers and consumers for lower carbon footprints. So 22 and beyond. Hops, U.S. flat overall in acreage, be some shifting of varieties here and there. Germany flat, the rest of the world flat. And then the worldwide brewing, really the high end, we see a high end growth on the premium brands. Those are taking off, spirits and RTD growth. Convenience and packaging, I think we saw during the pandemic, the mobile canning units that would go around to the breweries, so these brewers that didn't have permanent systems could still sell their beer. Convenience and e-commerce, I mean, how cool is it? You can order a beer on your phone and drive up curbside and pick it up on the way home from your local brewery. That's pretty cool. Health and wellness will still be on the front line, and I think low and non-alcoholic beers will continue to grow. We'll see that trend grow. And positive experiences as people get back together, drink beer, share their experiences. Beer is a community, and that's why we're all here. And I think we're all looking forward to a fabulous 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Now is the portion where we will do any questions anybody has. There's a microphone right there. I was told there's not a burner phone in play, so all questions will be just in the room. So don't be shy. Anybody have any questions for the panel? Everybody's still waking up, I think.
Looking long-term at the effects of farming and supply chain, there are companies with very aggressive carbon reduction goals, global greenhouse gas emission goals. How far do you think we can get, and how fast can we get there? Any thoughts there? How static is the system? How much room for innovation, change, and progress on this particular effort is there?
I can take that one. So I think the hop industry has a lot of room to grow in that area and to be innovative and reduce our carbon footprint. We see it a lot now with solar panels going up and looking at recycled packaging and continue to invest in that and look for ways to reduce all those impacts. On the growing side, I think by a lot of growers using more organic strategies, we'll see that there as well.
Very much, Missy. Does anyone else have any questions? You guys may have gotten off easy this year. Would anybody like to discuss, perhaps how the hop demand market is, just, nationally, internationally? JD, or? Yeah, we can't let you off without talking.
Yes, from our standpoint, I think it's just really important to reinforce that continued contracting, as was mentioned earlier. It's going to be really critical to make sure that the varieties get planted and in the ground. And I know a lot of brewers are still heavy right now they're still long in their positions with offtake, but that's going to be turning, and making sure we're ahead of that is going to be absolutely critical.
Yeah, one thing that we always like to, or I like to promote is being positive about everything in general. How the contracts helps out the farmers, helps out the merchants, helps out the brewers at the end of the day, and continuing those conversations year after year, being open with each other on each end, and knowing what you can and can't do is definitely helpful.
Good morning.
Hi, Ann.
Chris, I have a question for you. Of course, in the early 2010s, we saw a huge influx of interest by growers across the country in participating in the hop production in order to try to work with local breweries. And that, I think, has matured considerably over the past decade to the point where we now have some very experienced growers across the country. We certainly can't, I think in the terms of the resilience discussion yesterday, those of you who are still in that position of producing hops across the country and other parts outside of the Northwest have now certainly weathered a decade of ups and downs and enthusiasm and crashing and burning and re-enthused. How do you see the industry, the hop production industry outside of the Pacific Northwest proceeding over the next 5 to 10 years? And what are your projections on what we might be able to see as far as stabilization of acreage, or a re-infusion of acreage, or is that going to continue to downsize somewhat? What's your projection on that?
Yeah, maturing, those areas maturing is definitely a good way to put it. There's a lot of what we would say is called hobbyist farmers that got into the industry, East Coast, Midwest, and over the last 3-4 years, those growers have gone on the wayside because, they thought this was a get-rich-quick scheme. And I think that the growers that are continuing to grow, these guys are now understanding what they're doing. They're starting to expand. And as you've seen, the acreage in, say, even New York and Michigan decline heavily in the last 3-4 years. It's starting to pick back up. For the individuals that have had success, now they're willing, and they're willing to invest back into what they have going on. And I don't think that you'll see the massive acreage incline that we've seen in the Pacific Northwest over the last decade, but I think that some of these areas are going to become important for some of the smaller, more regional brewers that are looking for something to diversify into with unique terroirs and so on and so forth. And maybe there will end up being individuals that can put massive structures in some of these states. I know that Michigan has some good structure already put in place, and they can mature from where they're at now. Maybe they can become a bigger player in the overall market.
So I have a question regarding more what Bart talked about yesterday. I was pretty surprised to see that Citra was still the leading hop that most brewers, wanted or had a difficult time kind of getting their hands on. And I was just curious what your guys' perspective was on that, and what kind of the plan is to change that going forward.
Let me take this question. I was a little bit surprised to see that Citra was the #1 demand variety that people couldn't get, but I think it's part of the data is a little bit looking far further back than current. The industry has made quite some strides to ramp up the acreage of Citra, and I think we have met demand. so that the numbers we saw yesterday may be not quite in totally congruent to what the current situation is. I think right now the acreage is, I forget what the exact acreage is, but it is, I would say, more than in line with the demand.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Chris Swersey is still with the BA. He was the one that did that survey for many years, and one of the challenges he always talked about was getting breweries to respond. And I just didn't hear the number yesterday as to how many brewers were responding. It was obviously the first time maybe back in contact with people after 2 years, but it's a critical thing is the validity of the data. And some of us are obviously trying very hard to put other varieties onto the minds of brewers. And as brewers get out of the pandemic and out of, as Alex said, the closed tap rooms, they will be looking for all kinds of other things, all kinds of other varieties to work on. And I think what we need to have is patience about working through their inventory, working through their contracts, so that they do see a light at the end of the tunnel, so they can, let's say, diversify the amount of varieties that they're able to use, because you really can't be, constantly innovating if you have a backlog. And so, one of the real good traits of the U.S. hop industry has been the ability to adjust to that varietal demand. And I think that growers are all eager to do that. Certainly the breeders are, and the breeding never stops, and we're here for that purpose. We're here for their brewer creativity. We're here for the growers to have great varieties with great yields, and to get back to Missy's topic, to get back to varieties that don't need as much spraying, are easier to maintain and can be exported all around the world, because that's also growth of craft. We have to be able to maintain those markets.
Hi there. I had a question about the European versus U.S. market. Do you all see a difference now with the birth of ESG financing and a lot of the sustainability goals in Europe? Do you see that coming to the U.S. in terms of upcycling hops byproducts, upcycling the waste streams, or further into the brewing process? And do you see that as a significant or as an insignificant piece of the business in terms of more U.S. companies becoming B Corp certified, sustainable B Corps, or and in Europe, you see major companies like AB InBev getting ESG environmental-based bonds for financing.
Yeah, so sustainability is a big topic. I think our first round of getting into ISO 14001, our environmental management system, was really pushed by the European brewers, and the entire industry is trying to meet all the environmental standards and goals that our brewers want us to meet. And yeah, as we continue to work and find innovative solutions, we'll continue to work on that and listen to our brewers. The communication is really important. The brewers come to us and express their wish that they need more recycled materials. That's something that we really focus on.
And VSG is owned by Roar Malting, and so Roar Malting, our parent corporation, has the largest single-site malting facility in the world in Minnesota, and we actually have our own water treatment facility there and a biomass plant that actually powers the plant and then actually produces excess for the grid. And so Roar is very committed to that as well, so we are looking at any available opportunities.
The technology CRISPR-Cas9 has been widely being implemented across a number of different systems. I think about some of like the brewing yeasts that are now coming out that are able to express hop-like characters. I'm wondering what efforts might be being made in the future in hops specifically utilizing this, or whether it's disease resistance, yield, whatever else, water tolerance, and how that would be accepted around the rest of the world. Varieties, novel varieties generated using this technology. Any thoughts there?
Let me take this one. Our breeding program has so far only focused on traditional breeding, and we've shied away from GMO. As I look into the future and look at the challenges ahead, it is clear that we need to take a look at all technologies in breeding. And yes, in Europe, GMO, any gene-modified plant is shunned, and that is shunned until you have a crop failure, and all of a sudden everybody wants to have their food on the table. So to me, it is a matter of time when these technologies have to be included into the breeding, and that the attitude of genetically modified, genetically edited, genetically adjusted will be more mainstream and will be broadly more accepted. In the U.S., I think corn is about as genetically modified as you can be, so it is all around us. Europe is still very much against it philosophically, but time will, I think, be on the side of incorporating all technologies into breeding, because we have major challenges ahead. We have challenges ahead in terms of pesticide reduction. You've heard about the European Green Deal. By 2030, 25% of the European production should be organic. How are you going to get there? Unless you incorporate certain technologies which basically take away the necessity to use certain pesticides, or you have half the yields. So there's a trade-off people have to make. And so I think there will be a change in attitude towards these technologies, and it's also something for us to consider very clearly.
Anybody have any other questions? All right, going once. All right, well, in that case, thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you for your insight and your update. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. Give a round.